Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. We continue with our discussion. We enter into the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. The Yoga Sutras authored by Patanjali, Maharishi Patanjali, are dated differently. Most common dates we find are 200 to 500 BC. I have also read some dates which talk about 200 to 400 AD, but this seems to be the most common date. The reality being we really don't know. So we take this as a provisional date, awaiting real dates as archaeology gets more accurate, more precise. Now this is a book, Yoga Sutras, written by sage Patanjali. And the title of the book, of course, is Yoga Sutras. And what it means is yoga or yoga and sutras. So these sutras means these are small aphoristic statements. And these small aphoristic statements are related to the subject of yoga. So this is a book which is collection of 196 small aphoristic statements related to yoga. So we are not dealing with physics or chemistry or geology. We are dealing with yoga, and the subject has been explained in 196 short, crisp statements called the sutras. Sutra is nothing but short, crisp statement. In Sanskrit, of course, there are many other meanings. One of the meanings is that which connects everything together, like a thread. That is also a sutra. That which packs into itself very expansive meanings also is a sutra. But essentially, the sutras are short, crisp sentences. In English, what we call aphorisms. And these, in this book called Yoga Sutras by sage Patanjali, there are 4 chapters. And these 196 short statements are divided into these 4 chapters. The division is like this. The book is into 4 chapters, and in each chapters there are short these aphorisms. So in the first chapter called Vibhuti Pada, there are 51 aphorisms. Second chapter called Sadhan Pada, 55 aphoristic statements. Third one, Vibhuti Pada, 56, and Kaivalya Pada, 34. Total 196 statements or sutras, 196 aphorisms. This is the constitution of the book Yoga Sutras by sage Patanjali. We'll go into what is the focus of each chapter and then go into the individual statements and try to reflect upon the statement and on psychoanalysis and see how we can bring the two together, if at all. Very important element of the writing style. This is a very ancient writing style which we see in the most precious of Sanskrit literature, writing in aphorisms, leaving the aphorism to unpack itself in the mind of the worthy reader. This is also a tradition later on which was followed by many writers writing in Latin, writing in short aphorisms. And in recent times, we see this style of writing adopted by Wittgenstein in Tractatus. So Wittgenstein in Tractatus uses the same kind of writing. In fact, he takes it further, where he starts with point 1 and then writes a short statement. Then to explain it, he writes 1.1 to explain 1, and then he writes 1.1.1 to explain 1.1. And then after the point is over, he goes from point 1 to point 2, and then he starts 2.1, 2.2, and so on. So this style of writing is a very good style of writing. Very good when you have to convey essential knowledge and not comprehensive knowledge. When you're dealing with experts and not dealing with masses who would require explanation, examples, allegories. Yoga Sutra, therefore, as a book, it deals with essential knowledge and not comprehensive knowledge. Very important. If we don't understand this, we can't really appreciate the book. And we can't appreciate much of ancient Indian literature, which goes into essential knowledge, not into comprehensive knowledge. That does not mean there's nothing in Indian tradition that goes into comprehensive knowledge. Of course, there is an Indian tradition which goes into comprehensive knowledge. The essential knowledge you can see in Vedas, Upanishads, Brahma Sutra, Yoga Sutra, and Gita. And the comprehensive knowledge you can see in texts of Tantra, texts of Hatha Yoga, texts of Yoga dealing with chakras. There you can see the comprehensive knowledge, detailed specific knowledge of the type that you usually get in sciences. And in essential knowledge, generally you get the type of knowledge which you find in the Western tradition in philosophy, but in a very compact essential form, not in a loose verbal form. So Yoga Sutra is into essential knowledge. It is not into comprehensive knowledge. And we will see it again and again, how we have to unpack the generic statement into different contexts to understand how it would apply in different contexts. So this does not go into the context. It is a supra-context essential knowledge. It's a generic science. So it tells you how to reach the state of enlightenment, which is its goal. It does not tell you how each person with his unique personality and karma and situation is supposed to practice this generic science in his own circumstances. That person specific, personality specific, pathology specific, situation specific, Dasein specific prescription is not there. This is as away from Heidegger's Dasein as one can be. This is nearer to Wittgenstein's approach than to Heidegger's approach. So let us go into this. One more thing. The goal of Yoga Sutra, like the goal of much of Indian spirituality, except for some exceptions, is the goal of enlightenment. The goal of mukti, nirvana, kaivalya, or enlightenment. And the book Yoga Sutras by Rishi Patanjali essentially talks about how you get to the state of enlightenment. And of course, you start by first defining the state of enlightenment, and then talk about how do you go there, and talk about what happens on the path in essential terms. So this is a book of essential knowledge to reach the goal of enlightenment. It is not a book of comprehensive knowledge. It is not a book of person-specific prescription or a problem-specific solution. It is a generic science. It is not a specific science. Now let us look at the book Yoga Sutras by Sage Patanjali. It has 4 chapters. Now what do these chapters deal with? The First chapter, Samadhi Pada, deals with definition of Samadhi. Samadhi is the state of enlightenment. There are many names given to the state of enlightenment. And a simplified version is to say, use the word Samadhi. But then we see that what is called enlightenment is not one particular state of mind. It is not even one state of no mind as people call it. But there are various spiritual peak experiences, rare experiences, which are termed as enlightenment state, as an enlightenment state by different people. So we are dealing essentially with plurality of states of enlightenment and not one state which is called by different names. This is a politically correct statement to make, that everyone talks differently but they talk about the same thing. It is not true. They are not talking about the same thing. They are talking about things which have similarity, overlap between them, but they are not all talking about the same thing. So when anyone talks about enlightenment, what is similar between all these interpretations of enlightenment is the state of enlightenment referred to always is a state of no thought, always is a state of freedom from the usual compulsion of desires and fear and anger and negative effects. It is a state of high awareness, and it is a state generally of a pleasant feeling. So these are the states, these are the common elements of those states which are referred to as enlightenment. But apart from these commonalities, there are differences in those stations, the inner stations, the peak stations, the rare stations. And therefore, we will see in this chapter that Sage Patanjali gives various definitions of different types of inner states, rare states, peak states, which go under the name of Samadhi. And he prefixes them with different prefixes to delineate various states which are different, but which all have the common element of not having thoughts, freedom from desire, fear and negative effects, a heightened state of awareness, a heightened state of feeling pleasant about it, a heightened state of freedom. So these being the common elements, there are various states which go by the name of Samadhi. So in the first chapter, Samadhi Pada, Sage Patanjali actually starts with the goal. So it's a very unique thing that the first chapter actually defines the goal and talks about the various colors and flavors in which Samadhi happens. So we are not talking about one particular state called Samadhi, but a category of states which can be designated as various types of Samadhi. So this is where the first chapter goes. The second chapter, Sadhana Pada, talks about the process, the alternatives. And we can see here a very good thing how holistic Sage Patanjali is. This chapter talks about how to reach the state of enlightenment, the state of Samadhi. Whatever type of Samadhi you wish to reach, how do you reach there? And here he talks about all the alternatives available. Very open and holistic approach. He mentions pranayama, yoga, even psychedelics, and other forms of sadhana or spiritual endeavor. So he lists out in generic terms what are the broad alternatives possible to reach the state of enlightenment. Of course, this is by no means an exhaustive list, but in a generic sense, he lists out processes which cover a large spectrum of processes possible. Very holistic in approach, and therefore very relevant for contemporary times. Third chapter is Vibhuti Pada, and it talks about the mystical attainments which can happen on the way, which almost can be seen as magical attainments. This is something, one of the dangers of the path, that one can get lost in the lure of these mystical attainments and forget the goal of samadhi. Because these mystical attainments, they enhance one's powers, one's capability to live life, and may even enhance the quality of life, but they don't purify the chakras. They don't overcome the obstacles in the path of enlightenment. Rather, in certain cases, they can even strengthen the obstacles in the path of samadhi. And the fourth chapter, Kaivalya Pada, talks about attainment of samadhi. How is samadhi attained? And at that point, how do you feel? What is the state like? So we start with the definition of the goal and we end with the attainment of that goal. So we have the definition of the goal, the process or the alternatives to lead you towards that goal, mystical attainments on the way, and finally attainment of the goal. This is the structure of the book. In the second chapter, Sadhana Pada, the processes, Sage Patanjali lists out various processes and then puts up his own process, which he details out as the 8-step process. And this is a very popular, very well-known 8-step process of Patanjali, Sage Patanjali. If you ask anybody about Yoga Sutra, the first thing they will say, or probably the only thing they will say, is that in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, you have the 8-step process towards enlightenment, and this is the 8-step process. This has become like the signature of the book Yoga Sutras. Very popular. So let's just go over it in brief, and then when we go chapter wise into each of the sutras, we can see in details. So the 8-step process that he lists out is this. The first, he talks about yama or ethical behavior. So he says, start with practice of certain ethics, and he makes a list of ethics. That what do you mean by ethics? And he lists out elements of good ethical behavior. So first is observance of good ethical behavior. He details out what is good ethical behavior. We'll see it in the book when we reach there. After the observance of ethical behavior, the second is niyama. So first is yama, second is niyama. Austerity, practicing austerity and practicing study of the self. The third is getting the body in order, where the practices which resemble Hatha yoga type of practices called the asanas. The fourth step is pranayama, which focus on the breath part of yoga. So after asana, you focus on the breath part of yoga. Then withdrawal from the world as much as possible into the inner world, called pratyahara, is a withdrawal. Not getting engaged in too many activities in the world. Minimum engagement with the external world. And bringing your focus into the internal world with dharana. This is the 6th stage. You can translate this as focus or concentration, where you focus your attention, your awareness and attention on something very specific. It can be an idol, it can be a mantra, it can be a problem that you are trying to solve of the inner world. And then this focus becomes very sharp and intense, and from a large area, you come to a very small point of focus. So you narrow down the area of focus to a very small point or area or something that you want to focus upon, and you get lost in that focus. There is intense absorption, and this is called dhyana. The absorption is so intense that practically you get lost into that absorption. And then is the state of samadhi, that you enter into a state of nirvana, moksha, enlightenment, empty mind, state of no thought, any of the states which fall in the category of states of enlightenment. So this is a very popular 8-step process which is become the signature of the book Yoga Sutras. So this is how you start from 1 and slowly reach to 8. And of course, this cannot be done. This is not something which can be done in a week or a month. It takes years of effort. Some people say even many lifetimes to perfect this 8-step process and reach samadhi. So this is something broadly about Yoga Sutras by Sage Patanjali. So with this broad idea about the book Yoga Sutras by Sage Patanjali, just to recap, Yoga Sutras is a book by Sage Patanjali. The book is divided into 4 chapters: Samadhi Pada, Sadhan Pada, Vibhuti Pada, and Kaivalya Pada. Each of them has aphorisms of this number as put on the slide. Total 196 aphorisms. And it's very important to note that the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali are put among the highest of scriptural texts in Hinduism. Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, Brahma Sutras of Vedyas, Bhagavad Gita, they are deemed to be among the highest of spiritual texts in the Hindu tradition. So we are almost talking of the gold standard in the spiritual context. And of course, yoga has existed centuries before Sage Patanjali codified it in Yoga Sutras. But Sage Patanjali has extracted the essence of the whole system and systematized it. And fortunately, that has preserved yoga in its true, deep, and wider sense. And we have it as a valuable text of the inner world.